It happened in July of 1996. Back then, after the collapse of many Soviet research institutes, thousands of scientists suddenly found themselves without work. Some retrained, others simply disappeared into different professions. A small group of geophysicists came up with an unusual way to survive. They began organizing expeditions into the remote wilderness of the Ural Mountains and deep Siberian forests. The journeys were difficult, sometimes dangerous, but there were always people willing to join. The author of this story was one of them. The expedition was supposed to last 24 days. They carried supplies, but water was taken from rivers along the route, and the forest itself could provide food if necessary. The route was challenging. They had to cross 3 rivers and pass through 2 rocky mountain ranges completely hidden beneath dense forest. There were no towns, no roads, no signs of civilization anywhere along the path. Just endless wilderness. 9 people traveled together. Everyone was experienced enough, so the first part of the journey went smoothly. They moved from camp to camp, crossing rivers and climbing ridges without serious problems. Until the 11th night. That night changed everything. Sometime after midnight, a violent wind suddenly rose. The group woke up to the cracking sound of breaking wood. A tree collapsed somewhere nearby. Then another one. Staying in the camp was no longer safe. A falling trunk could crush the tents at any moment. They grabbed their essential gear, abandoning the tents, and climbed in the darkness toward a rocky hill nearby, a place where the trees couldn't fall. The rock ledge turned out to be a safer spot, but only for a short while. About 20 minutes later, a terrible thunderstorm began. Lightning ripped through the sky, the wind roared through the treetops, and rain poured down in heavy sheets. And in the middle of that chaos, one of the men noticed something strange. A light. Somewhere in the darkness of the forest, a faint glow flickered. After a quick discussion, they decided to check it out. Maybe there was a cabin. As they approached, they realized it really was a house. A wooden log cabin standing alone in the wilderness. And in its window burned the light of 3 candles. When they carefully opened the door, they discovered the house was empty, but the candles were burning, which meant someone had to be nearby. In the middle of the night, during a storm, in the middle of endless forest, it seemed unlikely the owner would wander far. The logic was simple. All 9 of them stepped inside the cabin to wait out the storm. The cabin turned out to be surprisingly spacious. 9 people fit inside without much trouble. The only problem was the lighting. 3 candles barely illuminated the room, leaving most of it buried in deep shadows. They began discussing who could possibly have built a house in a place like this. A single person couldn't have done it alone. There were no roads anywhere nearby, which meant no machinery could have been brought here. And hauling that many logs by hand through the wilderness seemed almost impossible. So who built it? Maybe some kind of secluded community, hermits perhaps. They decided to simply wait for the owner to return. While the storm raged outside, they unpacked some food, planning to share it later as thanks for shelter. An hour passed, then another. The thunderstorm continued, but no one came back to the cabin. That was when one of the men suddenly pointed his flashlight toward the floor. There was a small wooden hatch built into the planks, a cellar door. After a short discussion, they decided to check it out. One of the men lifted the hatch and carefully climbed down. later, he called up that there was something strange down there. He said there were two small mounds that looked like graves. Above them stood stone crosses, without inscriptions, but covered in unfamiliar symbols. In front of the mound stood a stone pedestal, and chained to that pedestal was a book. Someone upstairs asked casually, "So what's in the book?" The man opened it and began flipping through the pages. He said there was almost no text, only strange symbols and disturbing drawings. He kept turning the pages, and the more he looked, the more fascinated he became. As if he couldn't stop, his hands kept flipping the pages on their own, until suddenly they stopped on one of the most horrifying images in the book. Something strange happened to the man at that moment. It was as if something had completely captured his attention. Then the impossible occurred. The cellar hatch slammed shut. A scream came from below. Only a few seconds passed. The others rushed to open the door, but when they lifted it again, the cellar was empty. The man had vanished. After the initial shock, two other members of the group decided to climb down and check everything carefully. They examined the cellar. The two small mounds were still there, the stone crosses, the pedestal with the chained book. Everything looked exactly the same, except their friend was gone. Then it happened again. The hatch slammed shut, and when they opened it, the two men had disappeared as well. That was enough. The remaining 6 people ran out of the cabin despite the raging storm. They were in complete shock. First, 3 of their companions had simply vanished. Second, they had been inside the cabin for at least 6 hours, yet outside it was still the same deep night with the same violent storm. And third, it was impossible to understand how such a house could even exist in the middle of the wilderness. When they returned to their original campsite, another surprise awaited them. All the tents had been slashed. The equipment they had left behind was damaged as well. But the storm had already stopped, and on the horizon, the first light of dawn was beginning to appear, as if time had suddenly started moving again. The 6 survivors changed their route, and after 3 days of travel, finally reached the nearest settlement, where they reported everything. Police later returned to the area and searched the forest thoroughly, but they never found the mysterious cabin. The entire region was examined carefully, even together with the expedition members, and there was no doubt about one thing. In the place where the cabin had stood, there was now nothing but dense forest. Whatever happened that night remains unexplained,